I'm Evan Gudmestad, an instructor of application and web development at Ranken Technical College. Today I'm going to show off role-based authentication and authorization, really authorization piece, for an ASP.NET Core MVC web application. Let me demo what we're going to build. If I go ahead and log in as a standard user on my web application, you will see that I do not have permissions to access different various pages on the site. And so if I remember my password, of course, we log in. Number one, you don't even see the nav menu with the links that I don't have permissions to. And if I were to kind of hard code the route, of course, you get an access denied. You probably aren't going to call your end users fools, but nonetheless, I don't have permissions as a standard user. Let me go ahead and log in as my admin. And of course, what you will see is a button in the nav bar that you now have permissions to. Now, to show off the roles, you can see I have various roles in this web application. I can create new roles, and I can add, I've got two users. I can add users to these roles. I can remove them from the roles, right? So if I change my standard user, who was a developer, into an admin, if I log back in as my standard user, of course, I should see the link, and I should be able to access the page and create new roles, roles, and the like. If I just create a QA2, you could see now I've got Quality Analyst 2, just fictionally making up the name of a role. So we can add roles, we can delete roles, we can add users to roles, and then we can govern not only the links that they see in the nav bar, but what roles are assigned to the users and what pages they can access. Again, authentication, logging in the user, and then authorization. Are they authorized, or do they have those permissions to access those resources? So that's what I'm going to build. Now, this MVC web application is built on top of a restaurant MVC web app that I built, as you can kind of see here. I built this out 8 months ago. It was a video that I put out on YouTube, and it was a request that I got to add authorization to this. And so we got to that portion of the class, and I wanted to do just that. I wanted to add authorization to this. So if you are following along at home, as I would encourage, you can go to this GitHub URL. You can grab the URL to clone this repository, and I'm just going to start right off by cloning this repo to my desktop. All right, and as I mentioned earlier, this is built in .NET Core MVC design pattern. And so we'll have models, views, and controllers here. And it already has a database built in. That database has custom tables, such as orders and restaurant items, as well as the built-in identity tables. And so I will go ahead and link to that code along, if you will, to that prior, if you want to code this yourself so you really know what's going on and you don't want to start from the repository, you can definitely do that. But what I did do in that video is I selected the built-in identity for my solution. When I created the project, and I'll just demonstrate the process, I said a new project in Visual Studio. In this case, this is Visual Studio Community 2022. I selected the template for ASP.NET Core Web App MVC. Okay, and we can just call this whatever, because I'm not actually going to create this. But the check mark that I want to point out, that I enabled individual accounts. Okay, that's going to enable you to have a login system with ASP.NET Identity. So that's Microsoft's identity system. And that's what we're looking at here when I see this. If I can kind of expand and just take a quick glance, we can see some of the pages that are tied in with identity. Kind of scaffolded into the project. Now we're definitely going to be adding to this to get all of this to work. Now if I expand my models as I get into this, where I want to start is with my application user. Again, keep in mind there's a built-in identity system. Well, in that identity system, that again, the system that Microsoft built for user authentication, authorization, the main class that you work with is called IdentityUser. This is the C# class that we can kind of investigate and see. This is that class for a standard user. And in this project, I made a child of that class. So obviously a little C# here, and I inherited from the parent. So I have an application user instead of identity user. Well, this application user can have a list of orders, and I demonstrated in the prior video how you can make a user account and place orders with the user. Okay, so demonstrated that. But what we're going to add to this class, to this application user class, is now our user has a list of roles. And so as I am not wanting to hand code any of this, I want to kind of start with my finished product. If I just glance at my other screen, I'm going to bring in this auto-implemented property that says not mapped. And you can see as I bring in not mapped, it's going to have to bring in this using statement up top. Okay, all not mapped means is that we're actually not changing our database schema. We're not adding a column for role names to our application user. And so this auto-implemented property is a list of typed string, right? This isn't, iList, an interface. Basically a list of strings that is role names. And you can add a migration here, and you could see the way not mapped worked is not going to change our database schema. Okay, so in order to set this up to have users, and those users have roles, and based on the roles you can access different pieces, that's where we're going to start. We're going to start by extending IdentityUser. I did that already. We're going to add this auto-implemented property for the list of role names. This is just going to be a comma-separated list. So you can be an admin and a developer and a business analyst, whatever roles you can fathom, whatever groups you can fathom, that will be that can be a role of strings. Now, that's where we start. Next up, we have these areas. And so the idea behind an area is that these areas can be used to, you can have permissions. And so you can have an admin area that you lock down with permissions that unless you have a certain role name, you can't access this area of the website. So in this project, we already have an area for identity, and a lot of our login system is found in the identity. If I just kind of boot this up, and it actually might not boot because I have not, there's no database right now. Yeah, it says we need to actually build the database. So that's real simply done. Let's type update-database. Okay, so we're going to go to our package manager console. This update database, to explain what that does, is it's going to look at our migrations and create our database based on those migrations. And so if I go into data, migrations, we could see here I've got 2 migrations that are instructing our database server to create some tables and insert some data based on those tables. And so this update database command will run these statements to create our database. And that'll help us get a feel for the database itself. And I kind of mentioned this before, but this database is going to have the identity tables for all the user information, as well as the custom tables. So now I have SQL Server Object Explorer. If I click on View, here's my Object Explorer. And I'm using local DB. That's the instance of SQL Server. And here is my Tequila's Restaurant DB. So if your update database command was run, it should have created this database inside of your local DB instance, and you can expand it and see all of the tables that are custom. These are my custom tables: categories, ingredients, orders, products, as well as the identity tables. My identity tables is users, roles, and user roles. And so you can have a user, one table of users, one table of roles, and then this join table, this table exists in between those two to say my user number 1 is an admin. So it's used to link those 2 tables together. That's normalized databases, right? They're all linked together through their keys. And so you can dig through those tables and see all their keys and how they're linked together. But nonetheless, let's boot it up now. And I still had that cookie, oddly enough. But let me go ahead and log out. Now I should have no users. This is a fresh database. So even though my cookie made it look like I have a user, let's log out. Let's register a new user. This is the built-in identity system. And you can go ahead and do that. And you could see, if you have email set up to validate your email address. Otherwise, you could just click here. You could follow the documentation for setting up SendGrid to send an email, and you could definitely do that. Otherwise, you just click here to confirm your account. And once you've confirmed your account, then you should be able to log in. Okay, and there we go. And our landing page is just this ingredients. This is all being pulled from the database. And we have our first user. All that just to say, if I log back out, why was I doing this is because here, /identity/account/login. This is that area that I was talking about. That's what made me bring this up. Here's area, here's identity. And you might say, well, where's the login page? And I will do this. This is really interesting, but they kind of hide it from you. By default, what are the pages that I can see? Well, I see an account. I see my account manage page, but I don't see the login page. And so to bring that in, you can right click on the project. And we're going to add a scaffolded item, new scaffolded item. And on the left here, you'll see identity. And just to show you where that page is at, you have to bring it into the project because it's hidden by default with a bunch of other things. There's a bunch of pages that are hidden by default. And so that takes a second. And here, where is my login page? There's a lockout page. There's my login. So /account/login, it should pick up on my context file. If I drop down, there's my context file. And that's all you really need to gain access to the login page as it scaffolds that in. Okay, it gives me a little text file to talk about identity scaffolding. But if I go back to my Solution Explorer and kind of refresh, where's my refresh button? Maybe it's just in there. Yeah, pages, account. Oh, right click, refresh. I'm getting old, my eyes. So there's the login page. I didn't need to refresh anything. So this is a Razor page. It does not follow the MVC format. So this login page, login.cshtml, actually has a code behind file with it. You can expand it and see the code behind file. Okay, we won't have to touch any of this. But if you did want to change the HTML, it says use a local account to log in. Well, there's also external logins. I've shown how to bring in external logins. Maybe I don't want to show that. Maybe I don't want to show any external logins because as of right now, I don't have those external logins. I can come into here and delete that div. And again, we have full, access to the code and customizing the code. So now if I boot that up, we should no longer see that little sidebar about, well, no, I didn't delete that properly. Use another service to log in. Let's go back. Use a local account to log in. Okay, there we go. I just had a bunch of these open. I just had to completely shut it down, close the command line window. That just happens from time to time. Kind of completely reboot. And once I did that, of course, it reflected those changes. So if I go here, log in, okay, I even threw an extra N on my login heading just to get it to work. But now you don't see anything there about the external logins. I can still log in as my user. Okay, so now we understand that an area is a part of the site that we're actually going to lock down with permission. So what I want to do is I want to create an admin area. And then I'm going to lock it down, and you have to be in the admin role to gain access to the admin area. I'm going to go into Program CS next, and I'm going to bring in a couple changes into my Program CS. Before I actually make the area, let's look right here. Okay, line 14. This is the line for dependency injection, and it allows us to pass in the ApplicationUser class into my controllers. We're going to add one line. If I go to at the end of line 14, I'm going to say dot add roles identity role. Okay, so before now we didn't have roles. Now built into identity, we have this identity role class. And what this is going to do, what this middleware function call is going to do, is allow us to work with the built-in user roles tables. Okay, so when we add users, when we add roles and add users to roles, that we're working with these built-in tables that are a part of identity. So this middleware is a necessary piece here. And as I scroll down, one thing, and I had to actually use authentication. So I already had an app.use authorization, right? Authentication is logging in. Authorization is, the roles that we're talking about. And I did notice that was a missing middleware call. And what that allows you to do is work with the user, the sign-in manager, the user sign-in manager, and user manager. So there are built-in classes into identity. Again, they're called the user manager class and the sign-in manager. Without this function call, you can't work with those, or at least I've seen errors working with those. So we had to add that middleware call. And last but not least, I add a little bit of routing help. So notice this is the default routing in ASP.NET MVC. And this follows this pattern of controller followed by the action method in our routing, followed by an optional ID. Okay, so when we're, and this just goes back to those MVC fundamentals, you know, you're going to look at for a name of a controller and then a name of an action. And so this says go to the ingredient controller index method, and that's kind of the home page. And so of course, you know, we're going to go controller, ingredient controller, index method, and this is kind of where the controller, where it all starts, where the program starts. Okay, I'm going to add another routing option. You just give it a whatever name you want it to. I called it all my areas. And this says, hey, if the area exists, you know, this, for example, could be /admin. And then, okay, so an admin area. So that's the first part of the route. And then the home controller, the index method. So this is actually a nice line of code, because as we add maybe a second area or a third area, it'll just pick up on the name of the area, and that'll be the prefix in this route. That'll be the first part of this route, or the first segment of this route. Okay, so that's part of Program CS. Now we'll come back to Program CS here in a little bit. Let me think about where I'm going next. Okay. Now what makes sense to me to do next, as we're going to start adding, we're going to build this web application to add roles and add users to the roles, and remove users from the roles. It makes sense to me to kind of have one user. We're going to basically create some seed data, some initial data, that if this user doesn't exist, when the program boots up, it'll go ahead and create the user in the database, put that user as the admin. And so just kind of have a user that if I happen to delete all my users and delete all my roles, that it'll just go ahead and recreate the user, recreate the admin role, put the user in the admin role. And this is just so that you can experiment, right? Add users, delete users, what have you. So I'm going to go ahead and, you know, put this in here. Of course, this seed data does not belong in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to create this class in my models folder. And again, this is just going to be used to seed a user and put them in an admin role. And so in my models, I'm just going to add a class. This is going to be called IdentityConfig. And this is going to have one method, kind of bring in the method signature here. Okay, so here's our method signature. You'll see that it's a static method. So I'll be able to call this from my program CS by class name dot create admin user async. And what we're going to do here is we're going to bring in that role manager and that user manager that I was talking about earlier. Now, this role manager, this identity role, that's built into ASP.NET Identity. The user manager, what goes inside the generic angle brackets here, is my application user. Instead of the identity user, which is by default, this is the child class. Right? So again, this isn't a super top secret, web application. This is just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to create my username as admin at Tequilas. My password is sesame1! Something worth noting, if you're following along, the password has to meet complexity requirements, meaning capital letter, meaning there has to be a number and a special character. Okay, so if you're using this to seed your data as I did, make sure that your password meets the password complexity requirements that I just mentioned. Okay, and the role name, of course, is admin. So there's my username and password. There's my role. Okay, and here this is basically creating the role. So if the role doesn't exist, we're going to create it using our role manager, create async, passing in the role name to the identity role constructor. And if the user doesn't exist, create the user, right? So here we're creating the user. Now you're going to notice a few things here. My username is set this way. The email is set this way. Of course, the email is also the username, so I could pass that in differently. And I automatically confirmed this account because I thought that made sense since I'm just creating it myself. We're going to go ahead and confirm the email. So there's my user. Here's my function to create my user using user manager. And if that result succeeded, then we add the user to the role. So here's the user manager. Add that user to the role name. Again, the role name is admin. Okay, so that's all there is to this class. Create a user, create a role, and I'm missing a curly. So let's close that properly. Now I get to create what's called a scope, basically a temporary memory a scope is a temporary period of time that the server makes room in RAM for some code to run, right? So we're gonna create a scope in the program CS so that we can run that method and then it goes out of scope, so to speak. So after the use authorization, okay, but above use session, we're creating this variable called a scope factory. And then we use that scope factory to create a temporary scope. And we await the create admin user async method passing in scope.serviceProvider. Okay, this basically calls that method. So these two or whatever executable lines of code will call that method, create the user, seed the user, put them in the database. Let's test that. So if we launch the application, okay, and we should just be able to close it because all I really want to do is go back into my database. Now if I look at my users, you might need to refresh your users, but you could see my user is there, admin@tequilas.com. You can see the ID where my user ID ends in 5E. All right, let's go now to my roles table. If I view the data in my roles table, I see one role called admin. And then if I look at the join table, which is user roles, I can view the data. I can see that user that ends in 5E, and it has a role ID. That's my admin role. So this is where you're tying the user together with their role. And so my seed data has worked. I've created an admin. So as of right now, I've got 2 users. One's an admin and one is not. Okay, now I'm ready to start working on my admin area. So in order to do that, and this is going to be a little bit more scaffolding, let me just close all tabs and kind of bring this over here. All right, so here's my area, and I did this, add an area. Okay, now you can do this more manually, but I kind of like this scaffolding feature. My area name is going to be admin. This will take a second. And it kind of gives you a hint that you might want to do something in your program CS, very similar to making the area that we already did. But we've already done that. So now we have this admin area with controllers, data, models, and views. The controller, we're going to make a user controller to manage our users, including the roles that they have. So I'm going to add a controller. This is going to be user controller. And again, follow my convention, single user, not users, and singular controller. And because this is in an area, we have to mark it as such. We have to say area of admin. And that one little missing line of code will really break things if it's not there. All right, now, because of our program CS, we have dependency injection. We're going to need, as I mentioned before, we're going to need a user manager and a role manager. So very similar to what we've seen here, we bring in a user manager and a role manager, as we've seen in other parts of the application. And we need a constructor to initialize these variables. Okay, so pretty straightforward constructor. Here, the user controller constructor with two parameters, user manager and role manager. Then we initialize the fields on line 18 equal to the parameter, the field on line 12 to the parameter in the constructor. Okay, so here's our constructor. This allows us, again, these variables, the user manager and role manager. This is possible because of that dependency injection way back here. We bring in application user and identity role. So because of these lines, we can do this. All right. Now, the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to, I want to display a list of users. And so this index method is kind of the default, as we saw in our routing. If we go to the user controller, it's going to load this index, but right now it's not pulling any data. So I'm going to have this hit my database. And instead of just showing a user, I want a list of users and a list of roles. And so, you know, there's no model that is a list of users and a list of roles. So I have to create a view model, because again, what I'm envisioning here, as you saw on the demo, is a web page with a list of users and a list of roles. There's no model that is a list of users and a list of roles. So we have to create this view model. Now, this view model I will create in the models folder. I guess optionally we could put it in the area. Yeah, sure, let's do that. No, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna create it here. Add class. You could put it in the admin area, but here we're going to call this the user view model. And as I mentioned in here, this is essentially a list of users and a list of roles. Of course, IEnumerable means anything that you can loop over. So you can loop over a list, and since a list implements IEnumerable, this is functionally going to be the same thing. This is a list of application user. This is a list of identity role called roles. So this user view model will be used by our view. over here in the user controller. Now the problem is that our controller probably doesn't know how to get access to my user view model. So I'm going to have to add a using statement. So I just created user view model. If I just tab that in, it had to bring in that using statement. So it now recognizes user view model. Okay, and let's start with a list of application users. Okay, so again, we're gonna start with the list of users. This is an empty list. And we're gonna create a loop. So we're gonna loop over our user manager's users. And for each application user called user, again, that's our custom user class, we need to call get roles async. Now the problem why this is barking is this needs to be an asynchronous return data type. So to change my return data type, this is going to be a task of iActionResult. That way we can work with asynchronous function calls. And my user has role names. Again, this application user, that's what we started with, right? So we're reading the role names. And we just need to mark this as async. That's the last piece. Okay, now we're happy. We're looping through all of our users. And adding each user to the list with their roles. And notice user role names. We have to populate their role names with this function call, get roles async. Because just reading the users by default, that role names would be empty unless we populate it this way. Okay, and then again, basically filling up this list. So line 24, empty list. After this loop, we will have added 2 users to our list. Now we're going to create our view model and populate it with roles. So here's the roles property, just reading all the roles from the role manager. And then we're going to send our model and get rid of both of those. We're going to send our model to our view. All right, so create a view model, put data in the view model, send that to the view. I can right click this and add view. So it should add it in the views folder. Click add, it's called index. Notice it created the user for me, the user folder. So it created that folder, created this index. Okay. So notice my view does not recognize user view model. Why is that? Well, outside of the area, I have view imports. This view imports is for all my views outside of the admin area, outside of the areas. Well, it actually doesn't continue to work inside of the admin area. So I need a view imports file so that my view inside of the admin area can use the user view model inside of the models folder outside the area. So let's do that. So right click on views, add a new item, and we're looking for view import. And I can never find it. Razor view imports. View imports file. So notice it's underneath the views folder, but it's not inside of user. Okay, so it's a child of the views folder. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my other view imports. This one is outside of the area. And I'm just going to paste it right in here, which is inside of the area. And close both of those. But now my user view model is recognized. And this says manage users. And if I boot, if I've done this correctly, it'll navigate to that page. And there's several steps that I took that were needed so that I go to my admin area, user controller, index method, and it kind of looks like it works. Now it's not giving me exactly what I would expect, but it's not crashing. So if I hit index 2, that's very clearly not working, but this is working. So let's bring in maybe a heading or something, just so I can, I'm going to say like H4 with some margin on the bottom. Manage users. Now I have not put any permissions on this yet, right? So this should be open to the public. Okay, so we can see manage users. My title is not working the way I wanted it to, which is okay. I can also tell that there's no bootstrap. It's no bootstrap because I have a layout file that I need to reference. Notice my view imports is one file, but there's also a view start. My view start says to all my views to go ahead and use the layout file called _layout. Inside of _layout, we're referencing all of our style sheets and our bootstrap. So we basically got to say to use this layout file. So again, I'm going to right click, just very similar to what I just did, inside of my views and add a new item as a child. And this is my view start. And this view start was smart enough to say, hey, just use the layout. So now that's kind of the default that was in there. Let's close all these things here. And inside of index, if I view that in browser, should now get the bootstrap styling. Manage users. Okay, so we're at least looking like a bootstrap site. I can tell because we've got, well, it definitely looks different. I got some margin on the bottom there that's coming from bootstrap. Somewhere along the way we have a container from bootstrap. So our styling is being picked up correctly. Now the next thing that I have is a link to add a new user. So notice the way I've coded this link. It is the register action of the identity area and the account controller. So if I kind of expand identity, actually I can't show you in the panel here. I can only show you by booting this up. But the URL will be /identity/ account/register. So that's the path, and that works particularly well because we have this identity area controller name action name. So because of that, that link should work. Let me /admin user index. There's my add user, and that takes me correctly where I want to go. Now I did not remove, this is the register page, right? So I could easily go in here, bring in the register page and delete that section. So that's manage users. And I'm going to start by bringing in a table. Let me close the T body and close the table. All right, let's see if I can format this a little bit better. Okay, so as you probably saw in my demo, I was using tables to lay out data on the page. This table is a bootstrap table that's striped. It's a small table. And we're basically having a username and their list of roles. So in the table heading, you see those columns. You see the username column and the roles column. Here's a little razor syntax inside of the T body. Basically, if there's no users, you say there are no users. Else, loop over the users. So here's an else. Okay. So if there's no users, say there's no users. Otherwise, loop over your model.users. Remember, our model contains a users property with a list of users. And then we can read each application user out of that. And now we start the table row. Now in the row, the first cell in the table row, the first cell, TD, is the username, the user.username. The second cell, we're looping over each of the roles for that user. All right, so row, for each row, for each user, show the username and all the roles for that user. That's the second TD. The third TD for each user has a little form in it, a little form where we are going to allow the user to delete the user by its ID. So notice this is a button type of submit that calls the delete action in our controller, passes along the user's ID into that method to delete that user. So there's a TD to delete a user. And this is a good one. This next TD, after this one, loops over the roles. Okay, so our list of roles is all the roles in the database. And if the user does not contain the role, show a button that allows you to add the role to the user. So notice we have not created the delete method. This is a add to role method, right? So we're going to add a user to the role. We have to create this function. In order for that, we need the user ID and we need the role name. So we need to send these two pieces of information to the controller. So the user ID will be sent to the controller and the name will be sent to the controller. And then a button that says add to that role name. If the user is not in it, of course, the opposite is true in the else block. That means we need to remove the role from the user. And so you can also see there's a button danger for a red button if you're going to remove the role, and a blue button if you're going to add to the role. So you're going to see one of two buttons. and those button clicks are going to add the user to the role or remove them to the role. Right? That is the end of our table row. Now, let me scroll over, close the table body, close the table angle bracket, and let's view the view in the browser. Let's view the view. Okay, so we see 2 users, which is correct. My standard user has no role, and my admin user has the admin role. Now, none of these buttons are working yet because we haven't coded them in the controller. But while we're at it, I mean, let's just build this as we go. Let's make the delete user function. So I'll close that down. We're going to go back to the user controller. And we're going to bring in the delete function, right? So if we kind of go back to our here, notice we're looking for an action called delete, and it passes in one parameter for the user's ID. So this is going to be an HTTP post. And the method signature is an asynchronous method to delete, and again, passing in the string ID. So this ID has to match the lowercase ID right here. So this ASP-route is a tag helper, and this is a dynamic name of a variable, this ID variable, and it sends in the value of the user's ID, which ultimately came out of that database. So back in user controller, we're now in the delete method, and we should have an ID. We are going to read that ID out of the database by using the user manager, find by ID. So we've read the user. A little bit of error handling here. If the user is not null, meaning the user was found, run the delete command on line 48. So user manager, delete that user. And if the result did not succeed, loop over the error messages and spit those out in a variable called temp data. And temp data will display the error message if it's not successful. But otherwise, if it is successful, we simply return to the index method. It reloads the page. Now, the question is, do I have my temp data message? I'm actually not remembering. If I do a control F and I look through the entire solution for temp data message, okay, I need to actually populate that in my layout file. Otherwise, this error message will never display. So it's not really going to display my error message at this point. But I've tested it, and this code should work, so I don't anticipate any errors. But in order to see that error message, we need to fix that problem. But for now, let's view it in the browser. And I'm only going to delete my admin user because I've already got them reseated. You can see my admin user went away. If I were to hit my database right now and look at my users, of course, admin should have went away. So it did, which is what I would anticipate. Now, if I close it down and restart it up, it'll just reseed my admin user because that's what we already coded. Okay, so now my admin's back. Okay, so delete user is in fact working. Now let's make this remove from admin and add to admin. Now, keep in mind the way these buttons were created in the view is is looking for a function called add to role and remove from role. So we need to make these functions. And these functions have two inputs, the ID and the role name, the user ID and the role name. So in the user controller, we're going to make add to role. It's a post. So let's collapse. HTTP post, public, async, task, iAction result, add to role. A lot of times in programming, the name of the variable is not that particular, but here it is, because user capital ID on user ID has to match user ID as you put in this route variable. And role name has to match the string variable role name as such. All right, so again, not exactly sure, probably just read from the other Visual Studio that I had open. Here we're using our role manager to read the role. And if the result is empty, here's our error message. If there is no role, say, hey, it doesn't exist. Otherwise, find the user. If the user's not null, add the user to the role and redirect, basically refresh the page. So if I view that in browser, I should now be able to add my standard user to the admin role. And there you can see it flips the button color. So now let's make the remove from admin, or remove from role. Very similar method in our user controller. This is a post, remove from role, take in the ID and the role name, read the user. If it's not empty, remove from role async. So add to role async, remove from role async. Again, everything's done with these user managers and with these role managers. So these classes are really what you get familiar with as you're learning identity, the user manager and the role manager. So Control S to save, view in browser. And I can remove you from admin, add to admin, remove from admin. Okay. So let's just keep it so that we've got one admin user. bob@gmail.com. Not that we need to make another user, but let's just do that. And if I go now back to the admin, you can see our third user, of which we could delete. All is good there. Okay, so now we kind of see our user and role information. The next thing to do is to start managing our roles. And I'm going to do that back in the view after the closing table. Do another H4 that says manage roles. Okay. And so the first thing I'll do is I'll make a form basically to create a new role. So form method is a post, ASP action. Okay, so we have our admin role, but A role is very similar to a group. You can have as many groups as you want. Do a little bootstrap row here. So here's a div class of row with some margin on top and on bottom of the row. Let's close that div. And I'm going to have a label. This label is going to take up 1/12 of the row. So this is a column small 1. This is a form label that's small, basically a label that says the role's name. Just a piece of text that says role name. I'm going to have another, after that, have another div with 2 elements in it. This div takes up another small portion, like 3/12 of the row, in which we're going to have our text box. Okay, input type of text. It is a bootstrap form control. The ID is role name, and the name is role name. So this name attribute is going to be used to send in the value into the controller. So kind of how I used up here, this is one way of sending in values from the controller into the, from the view to the controller, using these route dynamic values. You can also use the HTML name attribute. It works just the same way there. And after that, we'll have a button that says create role. And this is a bootstrap primary button, blue button, view in browser. Okay, so we have a button, doesn't do anything yet, but it can accept a name. And when we click the button, we need to call a function in the controller. This is going to be the create role function. It's a post, pretty simple async function, public async. Let's get that in there right. So here's our function called role name. Again, our variable name does matter. We're just taking that role name string from the text box. We're using our role manager to create a new identity role called role name and refresh the page. If I view it in the browser, say developer, we can see now that there's another role, we can add a user to that role. So we could see Evan is now a developer, admin is now a developer. Perfect. So we've added a new role. We have buttons to add or remove a user from that role. Because the way this was coded, we could add and this is all working properly. Okay, we are almost done with the index view, right? So we're managing our users. We've managed our roles, but really this is just adding new roles. Of course, if we want to delete roles, we could do that as well. So I kind of started off with this if-else. And this if-else says, hey, if there isn't an admin role, make a button to create the admin role. Just as the kind of the premier role, you know, we could allow a user to type in the role admin, but basically If there is no role named admin, just give them a button to create an admin role. That's basically what this does. Now, there is an admin role, but let's go ahead and bring in this function, create admin role, into my user controller. So, this is kind of not really that necessary because we could just type in the word admin into the text box and, but this is just kind of a backup as I view. That way, if we do delete the admin role, we still give them a button. It's okay. Let's test it all out. So let's view it in the browser. And it's a big if else. And so if I let me see, I thought it said if there's I could see it. Even though I removed all the users with the admin role, the admin role itself is still there. So I have to actually finish flushing out this table so I can delete the role. The role is still in the database. That's why that button is not showing up. So I have to finish coding this functionality in my index. And so else, I'm going to code a table, bootstrap table that's bordered and striped and small. And inside of this table, we have a heading row that displays the role, the name of the role, and then we're going to have a body underneath the head, body, and we're going to loop over all the roles in the model. So for each role in the model, remember this is just all the roles in the database. Let's put in a TR and display in the first cell the role's name, and in the second cell a button to delete the role. So here, whoops, this is actually, TD, this needs to go inside of the row. There we go. Okay, so our first cell displays the name of the role. The next one is a delete role function that passes in the ID of the role. And let's make that function inside the controller. So user controller, delete role, brings in the ID, reads the role from the database, deletes the role, refreshes the page. And view in browser. And here we are, we can delete a role. Developer is gone. Let's add you to business analyst and let's delete business analyst. You can see you lose the role when you delete it, which is the functionality I would anticipate. Let's add my admin role back. Okay, now once you have all this set up, okay, we can manage our users, manage our roles, create rules, okay, all this stuff. Actually setting up permissions might be the easiest part, okay? Because what I want to say is, okay, if I'm not if I don't have the role of admin, I should not be able to do any of this. I should get a you are not authorized. So I'm going to add an authorize attribute role equal to admin. And this little line of code right here will now redirect my user if I'm not logged in or if I'm not a role of admin. It will appropriately send me either to the login page or a you don't have permissions page. Like right now I'm not logged in. Even though I know the URL, I'm not logged in. So let's log in as a user without admin. Oh, I do have admin. So let me remove myself from admin. Of course, I have to regenerate my cookie. So I log out, log back in. And now if I try and navigate, we have access denied. Where is that access denied? That's another identity page that you can scaffold in, similar to how I scaffolded in the login page. So if you kind of rewind the video, if you really want to see how I did that, I scaffolded in the login page. You can scaffold in the access denied page, and you can change the way that looks and what that says. All right, next there was a simple line of code. Let me close all tabs. There was a simple line of code to modify our nav bar, and that if the user has a role, you see a button to navigate to the URL, so you're gonna have to manually type it in, of course. So where is this gonna be? It's gonna be in shared layout. And here's my nav bar. And the if statement, the little razor block, is gonna look like this. If user is in role of admin, then we show them this nice little link. And this nice little link navigates us to the admin area, user controller, index method, and it's got a bootstrap icon of little icon of people. It says manage users, and this is I believe it's a yellow background color. So as I boot into the application, and I log in with my admin, there's my manage users. Because I'm an admin, I can do that. If I log out, log in as someone else, not an admin, I don't see that link. And if I even know the URL, I get access denied. And so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I wanted to show one last thing, is that if I wanted to change, you can see here, if I wanted to change this, if you are a admin or developer, you can comma separate this string and say, hey, now if I'm an admin or I'm a developer, I can have access without that quote right there. So this will work in the case of if you're an admin role or if you're the developer role, you can now have access. And then another common one, just to make sure that you're logged in, is is it authentication? Let me remember. Right in my face, authorize. You could just say authorize. If you just say authorized by itself, it just means you have to be logged in. Okay, so if you want to lock down a controller and just be logged in to access it, you could have authorized. But if you want to say, yes, you have to be logged in and certain roles, you could do that as well. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Let me know what else you would like to see added on to this application.